Hello and welcome back to the Messy Painting Desk here. Today we're going to be working on our first Stark troop. I've been painting a lot of Starks here recently, and we're going to work on the bannermen for the Sworn Swords as our test model, and you can take these ideas and push them across all of your Stark models. They're all pretty much the same. We're going to be using the more book-specific white with a gray direwolf on it instead of what you see on some of the models painted by Jen Haley, which are fantastic, but she went with like the white wolf on that blue-gray color. Blue-gray looks wonderful, and they kind of base their models on that gray color, but it's not really the books. So at the end of this, we should be looking at a model that looks something like that. Decent enough for tabletop. Not going to win you a competition, but that's not what we're looking for. We just want something that looks good on the table. So these actually paint up really quick because we did all that zenithal highlighting, and with the Lannisters, we use that to great effect with the cloth and the armor that we chose to be red by glazing red inks over it so the whites would show through. Here, I want the whites to show through, so we're going to let the whites do their work and leave those alone for the most part. If you want to do something a little more advanced with these, what I would suggest doing is, if you've got that airbrush and you're airbrushing, go in with a lighter bluish gray or maybe even a purple gray. I think one I used on these for the mid-tone was Badger Fur. So that way when I was doing the side on to get the whites to brighten up, hit it with that Badger Gray. It's a little blue, gives you a little bit more color saturation to your shadows, and then I started doing the whites on top of that. Alright, so the first thing we are going to do on this model is we're going to start working up the metals. That's probably what takes the longest on these models. So we're going to start with a base coat of P3's pig iron, or whatever dark metal you would like to use. Going to be working this sort of rough, so instead of using the wet palette on this, I'm just putting it into a paper plate here. Plus I'm only doing the one model, so I'm going to go ahead and hit all the metal parts. Make sure I'm staying in frame here. Still setting up the camera a little bit. Excuse me, gentlemen and ladies. There we go. Alright. So, as I was saying, just come in here and using a crap brush for this because it's metallics, and not trying to be too careful, and I'd rather not ruin good brushes with metallic paints if I don't have to. Alright, just pick out plates. And yes, you're losing your built-in highlights on your metallics here. So as always, if that is an issue, I would take a photo of your model before you start painting of the spots that you're worried about losing, and that will help you decide where you're going to put your highlights and shades in later. Alright, I'm going to aim for this to be a shorter video to upload and for you to watch. There's no reason to watch me going through and base coating some metals. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this real quick, and we will come right back when the metals are done. Alright, about 2 minutes later, I'm back and everything is base coated. You do want to be careful when you're doing the base coated metals because we've got his face. We don't want to get the metallic paint on his face, and I also want to keep it off of his hands. I don't know, are we going to paint him as though he's got gauntlets or he's got skin? I think we're going to go with skin on there to add a little more skin tone. But yeah, that's all there is to it. So the next step is going to be to start doing our washes of shading. So the shading colors we're going to start with is we're going to use the Nuln Oil by Citadel, and we're going to use that to start darkening up this metal. So first step is going to be one solid coat of this over everything that's metallic to help darken it up. This really helps with the mail to help get the links to pop out on these models. As I look at this male, I'm realizing I should probably resculpt my brawn because my male does not look nearly as good as this. I'm getting a little bit of streaking here because my paints are still a little wet. If you come into that problem because you're doing one model at a time, just splot in your black and don't rub it across, because then you're going to get sparkly shadows and it sort of defeats the whole purpose of the shadow. Get in there, like I said, and drop in some black. This will help give some depth to your metals. I think I got it on auto zoom. There we are. Okay. So yep, I'm just going to drop those in. Easy peasy. You're going to wait for that to dry, and then we're going to do a wash of the Agrax Earthshade. So we're going to dirty it up with some brown. And after we dirty it up with some brown, we're going to go in and drop our final shadows with the Null Oil. Hopefully the focus starts working a little better here. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and pause this again. I'm going to dry this up and we will start working on the Agrax Earthshade. Alright, coming back here after a real quick run under the blow dryer. And so the model's a little warm, which means when I put the Earthshade on there, it's going to want to grab onto the plastic real fast. Not a problem because I want to cover the entire model and we're going to hit it with some highlights afterwards. So what we're going to do is with the brown, I only want to hit the plates. Leave the male alone. The male's done for right now. We're going to leave that as it is and it should look decent. So we're just going to go ahead and do some brown. And this looks really dark, but we're going to quickly dry brush this stuff at the end of this. So we hit the helmet, which is plate. And let's go ahead and hit the top of his spear. Just let that run down to the bottom. That's what this is made for, give you that instant shading, make it look like you spent some time blending when you didn't. Every painter knows you use the trick, but that's okay. It looks good. Alright, so there we are. We've added a little bit of tarnish to our metal. It's browned up a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and dry that, and then I'll be right back. The next step you're going to want to have two brushes for, because we are going to blend in that last shadow just a bit. I was talking about male. I will take a moment to. Didn't really like the Braun model that came with it. I went and ordered the Dark Sword Miniatures Braun model. The metal pewter one that they didn't like that one either. It was just not the right scale, so I started working on my own using a few pieces from the actual game version. So I'm not where I want to sculpt faces, and I don't think that's where I was supposed to be for sculpting male either, but yeah, I just sculpted up a figure here. So, I don't know, maybe I'll end up going in there with my hobby knife and cutting away all that male and redoing, because I think it looks a little thick, and the rings are stand out when compared to what comes with the game. It looks like an old style 80s Dungeons and Dragons model. But anyhow, alright, so we'll be right back when everything's dry, and we will do that last shade. Alright, let's go ahead and do that last shade. This one you want to keep a wet brush for blending, especially with what I've got on here because the model's warm. Want to make sure that we don't get any tide marks where the edges from the capillary action of the liquid dry and leave that, bathtub ring. Something that happens with a lot of washes. I'm going to have it happen a bit on the edge of the spear there. So we're going to try to blend that out. So we're going to start right there. and we're going to put in our darks. And we're going to come in and we're going to blend that out. Not so bad on this side. Just drop a little black and blend and blend. Okay, and for the helmet, I want to keep it on the edges and to the back side because of our highlighting being to the left of the model. So put it there and blend it out. And put it in there and blend it out. Okay, so we've got, let's see if I can get the light to hit that right. Let's see as we turn around, it's a little darker. Alright, so the final bit we've got to hit is I want to hit the back and the bottom of the shoulder pad. It's one pauldron. I think it's a little too big to be called a spalder, although it has no articulation. Whatever. Still some of the most historical models that aren't for historical wargaming. Okay, there we are. We'll leave that. We're going to highlight that little bit up and make it some battle damage. So there we are. We've got that. And that is where we are with metallics. The next step, once this dries up, is going to be some dry brushing. So I'm going to go ahead and give this one more chance under the dryer, then we're going to dry brush this up. Remember, when we're doing this and we're painting an entire line of troops, by the time you get done with your last one, you're pulling up the first one, you're able to do this again. Alright, be right back. Alright, we're back. He's been dried, and now we're going to do a little bit of dry brushing. I don't know if I've gone over dry brushing on this channel. It's one of the more basic techniques, and you can actually do quite a bit of your models with just dry brushing if you know how to do it. The tool we're going to be using for the dry brush is a makeup brush. I've seen this going around a little bit here lately, and they are fantastic for getting smooth blends over more round shapes. And you can just do different amounts of pressure with your brush to get different amounts of shading on there, where I still like to use a flatter brush if I'm doing something that's like trying to hit edge highlighting or do fur or something like that. So you're going to take the brush, you load it with paint, and we're just going to get off most of the paint. Once you have most of it off, try it on your finger. You should be just leaving a little bit of metallic there. Once you're leaving just a dusting, you know you're at the right spot, and now we're going to go through and we're going to hit the plates. And we want to concentrate on where the light's supposed to be hitting. And make sure you drag down onto where those rivets are for his helmet. Unfortunately, because he's a banner, banner's putting a lot of this in shadow. So we're just going to go ahead and hit that real quick. And let's try to hit this. Maybe we can see this better. There we go, that's shining up. If you're doing this right, as you are hitting the model with your dry brush, it should really look like you're polishing it. As more and more of the bright metallic drops onto. Alright, and give him a little bit of added support with my finger. And do the same thing over here. And I'll really get that center ridge to pop. And the points as well. Okay, so we've got our first bit of dry brushing. I'm going to go ahead and hit a little bit of the armor as well. Okay, so there we are. And from there, I'm going to go ahead and get a little bit of higher silver paint. And this one we have to go very dry with our brush because otherwise we're going to overpower all of our shading. Just want a tiny bit of this more chromy looking paint. I'm testing it on my finger. Yep, that's gone. Let's try it on the blade. And this one I just want to hit the one side. There we go. And we're going to hit that one side. And we'll hit just a tiny bit at the top of the helmet. And at the very top of the pauldron spalder to help bring up that final bit of polish. Let's see if we can get that in focus. Fighting with my camera. There we go. Okay, there we go. So yeah, we've got nicely polished steel and it's ready to go. Alright, so the next step I'm going to go ahead and get set up for as I clean my brush is we are going to start hitting some of the leathers. Actually, I'm going to take that back. Let's go ahead and hit the face real quick. That'll be fun. We can use the wet palette for that. Alright, so we've got his face and his skin. First thing we are going to do to help pop this out is we're going to use another Citadel shade, the Reichland Flesh shade. You can also do this with the Privateer Press Flesh Wash, and I have found that if you take that and put some of that to a whole bunch of like matte medium or varnish, it gets a nice purpley tone to it. It's a lot of fun for your flesh tones. I used that on my Thean Greyjoy model and it looked really nice. Alright, I'll pull him out here in a second after we pause it. After we drop this shade on. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to take our Reichland Flesh Wash. Don't need to worry so much about the shaft of the spear. We're going to end up painting that black. We just want it to flow into the cracks and start the shading process. Okay, come in here. I think this brush is about seeing the end of its days, which is a shame. It's an expensive Series 7. I've had it for years, but it's not holding its tip anymore. Okay, so there we are. We dropped a little bit of flesh shade. Now if you are in a hurry and you got enough white on the skin when you were doing your airbrushing, you can leave it at this unless you want to go for a fun different skin tone. Which, you know, if I was doing a Privateer Press army, I would totally be doing that, but these models, George Martin's been pretty upfront with how people look. So we are going to right here. Okay, so we're gonna wait for that to dry for just a second. We'll be right back. All right, coming back, you'll see the scene's changed just a little bit, and we are looking at the wet palette here. So we are going to use the wet palette to make sure the paint doesn't dry out on us, and we're using Reaper Master's Tanned Highlight. Reaper Master paints don't need much water added to them. They kind of come pre-thinned out of the bottle, unlike something like P3. And I always add a little bit of water, but the water you get from the wet palette is usually enough to keep these moving. But with paints, use whatever you can get your hands on, and they will probably work. You just gotta play with the paint brands a little bit to find out how each one reacts. There's no one best paint that I've come across. Well, there's bad paints I've come across, but nothing I would say is bad for the hobby type paints that you're gonna buy. Now where you're gonna see a bad paint is something like buying craft paints and stuff. They have such a coarse ground pigment and so much acrylic carrier to pigment that once you start watering them down to do any kind of detail work, they do not look good. Doesn't mean I don't own a few. I use them for doing my bases. I use the black to pull out the bevels on these bases when I'm done. And I also use those kind of paints when I'm just doing terrain work, that kind of thing. But I wouldn't use it for a model. Okay, so we're just going to use this paint, and we want to help pop any details we want highlighted. Now with these stark models, there's not much there. And this is the right side cheek, so it's in shadow. And it's really hard to do with the camera in the way. You want to bring a little bit of color there, but you don't want to put too much and lose your shadow. Yeah, big thing with this is you want to use this flesh color to help bring up some of the areas that maybe stayed too white because the wash didn't stay on those raised edges, and also to pick up some of those areas that were just too dark. But yeah, like that. That is where we're going to stop for tabletop. Maybe I will do some more advanced skins on painting. I don't know, maybe I'll do it with Sansa, maybe with Caitlin. I don't know. I'm kind of ready to paint both of them, but we'll see. Maybe one of those will get filmed. Oh, there we are. See if I can get to where my focus is at. Now I know I gotta hit that hand there in the behind the shield. I'm gonna go hit that hand behind the shield, so I'm not trying to look around the camera, and we'll be right back. Alright, coming back after a fun little accident where I decided to shake a bottle of ink that was not screwed up tight, so I got ink all over my desk. Oh well, let's continue. Alright, the next step is going to be using some of the Burnt Sienna ink by Liquitex. Yeah, transparent burnt sienna is the color we're looking at. Transparent is great because it'll show the shading through. And we are just going to use this for one quick purpose, and that's going to be to hit the rolls on the tops of the boots. This will show that that leather hasn't been treated the same way the outside of the boots has. It'll also help give a little bit of visual interest and break up the monotony of just one color of brown. Make it look like you cared. Okay, and that is it. Just a quick little bit of brown on those boots, and it is transparent. So, look at the camera and I see where I'm missing a spot. Just dropping a little bit of brown in there. Okay, so from there, I just got set off camera. I'm going to be a little cautious pulling out this next bit of ink. Here's my ink. Here we are. Alright, next is going to be Burnt Umber, which is going to give us a more classic brown instead of the red brown. Go ahead and drop some of that. You may notice I've got the plate out inside the wet palette again. Especially with these transparent inks, they just behave a lot better when you don't have any water wicking up into them. Alright, so we're just going to take this brown color and start dropping it on everything that is leather. Alright, so we have done no dilution to the ink because I want it to be strong, but we also need to make sure that we don't let it pool unnaturally on the model. So wherever it pools, you're going to get darker staining. So take your time, spread the color out over your area. Normally when I'm using an ink like this, I would tell you to first dab some of the ink up onto a nearby paper towel. I have found with the transparent browns anyhow, once I do that, I lose too much saturation of color. And I end up having to do a lot more coats, where if I'm just careful and make sure that I'm not allowing any pooling, ink directly to the model works in certain situations. And me having a finer brush is going to make sense in a second as we start pulling out the details of the shoulder straps and the belts. Right now this would be a lot easier with a bigger brush. I just didn't want to be juggling brushes. Alright. You can see you've got too much ink there on the toe. Let me see if I can get that to show up in the light. So yeah, when you get that, just go ahead and pull a little bit of that color down. Just don't want any overly brown spots. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and start doing the exact same treatment to all the belts. You may notice as we're looking at this model, he's starting to look close to done. You know what? That's because we're close to being done with him. I have found that the Stark models with this kind of basic tabletop paint really take about 30 minutes when you're doing them in line fashion and not stopping to dry everything. Takes a little bit longer on video. You're painting around a camera. You're pulling out your colors and setting up your palette. But when you're painting in an assembly line fashion, you've already got that color set up for the next model. So that's just a one-time investment that pays dividends. From my playing of Euro board games, I'm all about efficiency and setting up things as economically as possible. That's going to be our next podcast. Cast here. We're going to talk about how Euro board games might accidentally make you think you're better at business than you really are. Okay, we've got the belt. And now we're just going to move up and hit the straps. And this is why you had to be a little careful when you were base coating with your metallics. You didn't want to cover up this white for the strapping with metallics, because if you did that, the metal would shine through the ink and it would end up looking a little funny once inked, and you probably want to go back in there and recoat it in white to help ensure that wasn't an issue. Alright, so there, this leather's done. And while we've got this brown out, he's got a beard mustache thing going. I'm going to go ahead and use that brown and add just a little bit of, let's see, yeah, we're going to use the FW Sepia ink. I've been doing this inking for a while. Also noticed that the inks tend to dry really shiny, like to the point that they don't look good on a model tabletop because they're too shiny. So you need to make sure that you are spraying these down with a mat, and even with that, it might take a couple coats because this stuff's really shiny. I've been painting some D&D models for a friend, Knowles, and I've been doing all their furs and inks, and ooh, they're shiny. I've done their first coat in Tester's matte, and they still are kind of shiny. Okay, carefully use the tip of that brush. We're gonna get in there. We're gonna get in there and make a mess because it went right up his nose. So, when that kind of thing happens, that's why we still have our wet palette and why we still have our other paint. Come in there and dry up a little bit of that ink with a sort of dry brush. And now we're going to go ahead and pull that lip out a little bit too. Now we gotta work on the beard. So much fun working around a banner shaft like this. If this was an unassembled model when I bought it, I would have left that part off until the end. Alright, a little bit more ink. And we'll try to... Alright, so more time than I wanted to spend on that, but you can see that even when you have, oh my lord, I went out of the lines, I don't know what I'm going to do. And it's an easy fix, you just got to keep playing with it. You can just keep moving stuff back and forth. I mean, heck, if you want to paint actual paintings, that's half of it, is just taking your colors and moving it back and forth. You go too far one way, just bring it back the other way. Don't be afraid to work it. Alright, so that's where we're at with this. And as we can see, we're getting really close to being done with this model. So the next step is we're going to go ahead and paint, let's do the grays on the dire wolves next. So this, we're going to start with a base coat of, make sure my paint's not nasty, Great Coat Gray by P3. I'm going to take this, I'll get rid of the plate. And we're going to drop some of this onto our wet palette. And it is a little dark on its own. So I'm going to add just a touch of P3's Mara White. Put that off here to the side. I'll grab a little bit more of it when I need it. And blend that in until you get the tone you're looking for. Right about there. Let me see if I can show that off. Alright, you see I've got a gradient going there. I've got some white off to the side. I've got a lighter gray and a darker gray. So I've got my shading. I've got paint available to make my highlight. We're ready to go. So we're going to go ahead and start base coating the dire wolf on the chest. Again, easy does it. No, I have somebody honking. Somebody's here to talk. Alright, I'll be right back. Alright, neighbor is gone, so let's get back to work. Oh, real quick, I just want to show you something that's fun about P3 paints. When you add water to them, you'll notice they separate and the other colors start popping out. So, Great Cloak Gray, when you add water to it, let it sit for a few minutes and you're going to notice that blue is the color that pops out. that blue makes just a wonderful corrosion color when you're working on bronzes. It's not the super bright green copper type tone that you're used to. It looks more like the duller blue greens that you can get when you're looking at like an older bronze statue that has been sitting in the weather but hasn't completely gone to corrosion. So most of the P3 paints do have a nice little separation like that, different colors. That's why they're fun to work with. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pick up some more of that gray. I'm going to start working on the shield. Okay, my camera's being weird. It looks like we're recording now. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and continue with that gray. Make sure my focus is set. I don't know what it is with these dire wolves, but they just seem so much harder to paint than the Lannister lions are. It's like they pop out of the mold that they were made just enough that you see them, but not so much that you don't accidentally hit what's underneath of them as you're painting. Okay, so especially on the shield, I feel that you gotta get in with that gray and pick up the top edge because that white is really obvious. It's gonna be a white on white model. So we're just gonna go ahead and hit the top edge with a highlight color, which is just a little bit more white mixed in with your greatcoat gray. Then we're going to put some of that same highlight color, just spread it onto the top there. And we're going to wet our brush down. And as long as it's not too dry, yep, see, it was just long enough to dry on there. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and work in the wet blend. Get a brush ready. Take up your first color, your base, and we're going to paint that in. And then we are going to use that while it's still wet and blend it into the highlight color. So that way we have light to dark on the shield. And that is all there is to it. So I am going to go ahead and do the same thing with the dire wolf on the flag. Actually, let me show one more step because I have the pure color and we're going to use that as the shadow. And then I'll do that on the flag. Alright, so you're just going to take your pure greatcoat gray and you want to pick where your shadow is going to be and do that same wet blend. So you can probably get some light where I can see it. Get those leg bottoms. And the same idea as for the wet blend. Now you want to take this to the next level. What you do is you paint the dark, you paint the light, then you put your mid-shade in the middle, and you blend the whole thing out. And really take off. Alright, that's all there is to that. I'm going to go off camera, and I'm going to do the direwolf. I'm also going to be dropping some green ink onto the edges here and also onto his sleeves. And that is because I am making these the honor guard for Mage Warmint. Her colors are green, so I figured she should have her own soldiers. Kind of show you what I'm talking about. Is green on the shield, green sleeves. They still look like Starks on tabletop, but then they have that added little bit of, hey, I know what team they're on. And then of course they're fighting with fur. So yeah. So I'm gonna go off camera here for a second and do that stuff, and then we will be back to talk about doing the golds. Alright, so while I was off camera, I finished up with the dire wolves and dropped the green on as I was discussing what I would do. Alright, so for the last steps, we're going to go in here and use our gold. And we're just going to pick out those metallic details that need to be highlighted with gold. Alright, there's that. Go ahead and hit the bottom of his banner. Because, you know, you want to put gold on the bottom of the thing you stick in the mud, right? Oh well, whatever, it's brass. Uh-oh, got a little bit over there. Come back in and rinse that off here. So I finish up this ring. Alright. And knot that a little bit up. Grab a little more green. Highlight that away. Follow the spot with Mr. Green. There we are. Alright, back to our gold. And I think the only other thing we gotta do gold on here is the ring on this. Now I think of it, I think I did the other one as steel. Oh well, he's special. You guys know I don't like everybody to look the same, I just like them to look close. Because no medieval army had a uniform. We only start to see that at the end of the medieval era with the liveried armies, as especially in English history you start getting nobles who, you know, earls and dukes who kept their own private armies that had nothing to do with the king, and then they started fighting private wars when the king was weak and couldn't control them. And these guys tend to have a bit of a uniform, and that was just because they were wearing their lord's colors, when you couldn't really just wear the colors of England because you would have been sporting the heraldry of the king, and well, nobody has that heraldry except the king. Fun little trivia fact is the 3 rampant lions you see on the King of England's heraldry, that those are actually leopards. Right? You know, you go, oh, they're lions. They're just, you know, lionesses. No, those are leopards. Because reasons. Right. You'll notice that we didn't really do anything on the inside of the shield. It's hard to see tabletop, and it should be just about completely black from when we were priming our model. I see one little strap in there that we're going to pick out with some brown paint at the end of this, and that's going to be it. once you have this gold on here, it is up to you if you want to go in and add a little more depth with some shading on the gold and some highlighting. I might do that, but it's going to be off camera. Alright, so there's that. And finally, let's find a brown paint. I've got a little planning on it, and I don't have any sitting out. Brown paint, brown paint. I'm going to use Battlefield, or Blood Tracker Brown by P3. Which is good because I got to clean the cap, it wasn't sealing. Alright, so we're just going to take a little bit of that brown paint, plop there on the palette so it's not, my brush isn't loaded. And we're just going to ever so carefully pick out those leather straps. And there is a little bit of one right there for his hand to hold. Alright, there we go. Got the brown for the straps. While I turn this off and we got a good thing going, we're going to go ahead and do a quick pass on the gold on the shield. So we're going to go in with some of the Agric Earthshade. And we want to put that to the bottom half. Put a drop at the bottom of each of those rivets and then pull. A little bit too much there pulling at the bottom. Go ahead and take that off with your brush by drying your brush off and then coming back and hitting the Earthshade again. And we'll get a little bit around there. Go ahead and trace a line of this brown. It's pretty transparent, so you don't have to worry so much about your green. And we're going to drop some into the shadows under that shield. Alright. Okay, there we go. Add a little bit of depth. I got some on my brush yet, so we'll go ahead and hit up belt buckle there. Use that to shade the top of the brass on the bottom and also to help line the brass ring at the top. Okay, and now from there, we're going to take some of that gold paint that we've got. And take a little bit of, use some Model Air Chrome. Put a drop of that on the wet palette. And we're just going to mix what gold I have with just a touch of that silver. So we can get a very pale gold, and we are going to hit the rivets. A little bit more of this pale gold. We're going to catch the edge of that point, the edge of each of these points, the top edge because it's going to catch light. Maybe just a little bit there in the bottom, and then we're going to hit the top edge. And draw it up towards the top. A little drop of it right there. Help bring that up. Alright. And why not just do a little bit here too to add a little visual interest. We've got the color, might as well use it, right? Okay, there we go. So we've added just a bit of an edge highlight. Now I'm just having fun with my edge highlights. Okay, we got some edge highlight on there. Brightening it up. We have pulled out the rivets. We've got everything shaded. And if you want to do something more starky without the green, I would suggest going with maybe a black right there. With the method we use with the Lannisters, you can use just a black ink that's been watered down, and then with some matte medium to get a darker gray. You can go brown for a leather undershirt, whatever you want to do. But yeah, that is an easy way to paint your Stark troops. And in assembly line fashion, it really is about 30 minutes a model. So this is a way to really quickly get through the Starks, and they've been painting up a lot faster than the Lannisters, let me tell you. Alright, I hope that was informative, and I'll see you next time.